Jeff Childers joins us now. He's an attorney, he's an author, and he's writing some very important pieces over on his website, which is coffeeandcovid.com. Coffeeandcovid.com. Here we go. September 11th, 2025, turning points. A nation plunged into tragedy, a lost political party relishing in death and destruction, and a resolution to transform this immeasurable loss into a new turning point in the history of freedom. He joins us tonight. Jeff, welcome back to the broadcast. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks, Brandon. It's good to be here.
Well, I'm glad to have you with us. And you and I spoke this morning, and we're talking about Charlie Kirk. And I was going to have you on yesterday. You don't know this, but I was going to at least call you or text you and see if I could get you on for my broadcast last night. But we ended up putting all that aside with the assassination of Charlie Kirk. But you had already written a couple of articles that were talking about, can the nation stay together? Will this nation splinter apart? Are we too divided on values? Do we share common values enough to hold us together? And I was talking with Chris Martinson, who'll be one of the keynote speakers at our national conference coming up on October 3rd and 4th here in town. And he was saying, you've got to read Jeff's latest articles. And so I went and read them. And Chris is talking about, can the nation stay together? And then Charlie Kirk happens. And the assassination, this seems to add more to what it is we were going to talk about when I got you on, what you're already writing about. Because we have newscasters, we have educators in higher learning facilities, institutions, we have broadcasters, we have average citizens. I don't know how average they are, but we have citizens. We have even people in our government and our military who have been caught on social media celebrating and rejoicing at the murder of a young father and husband. I mean, again, we have to ask ourselves, do we share enough common values to even hold us together? Members of Congress last night couldn't even agree that it's okay to have a verbal prayer to pray for Charlie Kirk's family. They couldn't even agree to do that. So speak to us about the articles you wrote before the assassination of Charlie Kirk and how the assassination of Charlie Kirk and the reaction by these different people groups plays into what you're already talking about, this trend that we're on.
Yeah, so there's a sort of fundamental breach, I think, between value systems and worldviews. You know, worldview is something that's really fundamental to a person. It's the way they look at the world. It's the way they process things that happen. And it's the combination of a whole lot of different values. And so it's very difficult to change your worldview. It does happen sometimes. People who convert to a religion, for example, may experience that kind of profound shift. But in this country, we've got two major political parties, and for decades, they've been drifting farther and farther apart. And in response to the murder of that young lady on the train in Charlotte, North Carolina, and because of the daily blogging that I do, I watch the news very carefully and social media, and I saw a trend of, people were talking about race. And there's clearly a racial component there, but I didn't think that was the real story. I think the bigger story with regard to that poor Ukrainian immigrant is how that man that killed her came to be. And I think it's pretty simple. There's a formula, and it's a progressive leftist Democrat formula. And what they do is they take a young man, and this young man could be any race, and they tell that young man from the time he's a small child that there's another group of people that's oppressing him and preventing him from succeeding and ruining his life. And as he gets older, he gets more and more resentful and angry, and eventually he begins to act out, and it's perfectly understandable. And what's happened is that the Democrats have combined that part, the sort of false training and the blaming, so that young man is angry at a particular group, and then they relieve the consequences of that young man's acting out. And so what happens with, if you have kids, you know exactly how this works. They test the boundaries.
Yeah.
And so they, go over the line the first time, maybe a little bit. And then depending on what kind of consequence they get, they either retreat and reform their behavior or they transgress a little bit further. And so unfortunately, we've got this system with these two parts, the part where you teach the young man to hate this particular group, and then you don't punish him when he acts out, you create some monsters. And that, I think, is the story of what happened to that poor young lady.
And let's talk then about word. The left likes to redefine words, but they also like to weaponize words. Whoever gets in charge of redefining words has a great chance at winning debates, right? They're pro-choice, right? All the different things they use. Doctor-assisted suicide or end-of-life care or mercy killings or die with dignity. They give all these different words, okay? They don't want to say murder. They don't want to use the word active euthanasia. They don't want to say abortion. They don't want to say killing a baby. So they redefine terms, right? But now they have also, in their process of rewriting the meaning of words or the intent of words, they now have said that if you are a Christian, if you speak about marriage in the context of biblical Christianity and morality as ordained by God as to what he considers biblical sexuality and morality, if you talk about the Constitution even, if you uphold certain values, even the idea of borders and national security, these are all dog whistles, they say, of a racist, of someone who's xenophobic or Islamophobic or all the other things they can come up with. And that these are really it's not just hate speech. It's, as Joe Biden said as president, these people are domestic terrorists. It's as the Department of Homeland Security said under Barack Hussein Obama, and we have the original document during the Obama presidency where the DHS said potential domestic terrorists are pro-lifers, people interested in end times Bible prophecy, veterans, etc., right? People concerned about the collapse of the economy, things like this, border, immigration. These are all potential domestic terrorists. And we went from potential domestic terrorist, and then we're actually called domestic terrorist by Joe Biden's administration. And so as we have this cultural Marxism, this desire to destroy the foundations, as Herbert Marcuse said, the old way of revolution is old-fashioned, the new way is diffused and dispersed, disintegration of the system, our free market, Judeo-Christian, constitutional republic, capitalist, private property system, destroy it. To do that, you have to take out the enemy, which Karl Marx said, my object in life is to dethrone God and destroy capitalism. Herbert Marcuse of the Frankfurt School said that it was Christians and Christianity and patriotic male leaders and the patriarchal family. So they have weaponized words to say that we're violent, that we're terrorists. Now, when you do that, Jeff, what is the play being made and what is the left seeking? What action are they seeking by doing this?
So, as you mentioned, I'm a lawyer. I do practice in constitutional law. The Constitution has a Bill of Rights that's encapsulated in the first 10 amendments. The First Amendment secures individual liberties for two areas. What are they? Speech and religion. That's the First Amendment. Modern progressivism is teaching kids in university right now that speech is violence. They have a fancy academic word that they use, microaggression. And aggression is violence. So under the common law, going back probably to the Code of Hammurabi, you have a human right to self-defense. And so if you're a kid and you hear that speech is violence and you know that you have a right of self-defense, then what are you entitled to use to defend yourself against this unwanted speech. You're entitled to use violence back. And that's the shell game that they're playing. They're destroying the First Amendment. They're deleting your ability to speak. And Brandon, all you have to do, go on social media right now. It's like they don't even realize what they're saying. And you can see, top name liberal influencer accounts saying things like, well, it's bad that Charlie Kirk was murdered, but, and there's always a but, he said, and then they say, recite something that they think or mischaracterize that he said. So they'll say that, well, it's too bad he was murdered, but Charlie Kirk said that transgenderism is a mental illness. And the clear implication is that somebody who says something like that should expect a violent response. And so on the one hand, basically they're saying, hey, you could die if you talk this way. And that's sort of has a chilling effect on speech. At the other extreme, they're saying, there's people who are going to kill you if you don't shut up. And that's the exact antithesis of the First Amendment. And then when you just connect that dot a little bit further, you mentioned the religious foundation of this country. The religious speech is some of the speech that they target the most obsessively. And so they're in one stroke, they're trying to take out religion by making it impossible to talk about it in public, and to control the way everybody thinks by regulating the way we talk.
So in other words, if you classify conservative speech, free speech, conservative speech, traditional speech, Christian speech, and the Judeo-Christian religion, if you classify that as microaggressions or macroaggressions or violent speech or terroristic speech, then it justifies, according to them, at least they're trying to lead unthinking young people or unhinged adults, psychologically challenged people or warped people, to think that that justifies a reaction of violence. Because it's kind of like, well, if you knew that Hitler was going to become Hitler, wouldn't you have taken out Hitler before he became Hitler? And yet he was writing and speaking as a very young man about all these things. So why let a young guy like Hitler, who's now saying and writing these things, become Hitler? Take him out while he's just a young man who doesn't do these things. It's almost that kind of game they're playing. Well, these people are violent. They're Nazis, they say. They're fascists. They're terrorists. These are evil people that are tyrannical. They're going to enslave us. So when they start showing the signs to us, and they've kind of rigged the game here by declaring free speech, constitutional republic, biblical worldview, Christian worldview as violent speech. But once they start crossing these barriers that they've manufactured, that justifies us taking them out in the name of protecting humanity. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So they have done two things at once. So they've elevated speech to the level of violence, which justifies you in responding with violence. And then they've lowered the definition of violence to mere speech, so that you can be condemned. So again, in these posts about Charlie Kirk, which, I mean, it's just breathtaking, the lack of self-awareness. But again, they say it every time. Charlie Kirk didn't deserve to die, but he said, and it's always something he said. Where did the First Amendment go? What if he did say it? What if he was some white supremacist who said, that white people are the best race, and that's just how it is? Well, does that mean he deserves to die? Does that mean that anybody's justified in responding violently to that? There's a premise there that I think conservatives have accepted and need to start rejecting. And the premise is that there's some speech that's out of bounds. And right now we're seeing an example where there are hundreds or maybe thousands of accounts that are literally celebrating Charlie Kirk's killing right now. And they're saying just the most horrible, awful things that you could imagine. But should we lock them up for saying that? That's the crux of the First Amendment. I think that conservatives would say that's horrible that they said it. We should expose it. We should expose them to public shaming and ridicule, but not throw them in jail or, God forbid, kill them. And that's the difference in worldviews that I don't see how, Brandon, that can be reconciled. What's the middle ground between those two positions? There is no middle ground. Charlie Kirk was the debater. Charlie Kirk encapsulated the democratic ideal, right? Which is the democratic ideal is that we sit down, we have different ideas, we debate those ideas, we try to see where we have common ground, and we move forward together, even though we don't necessarily agree with each other 100%. That was Charlie Kirk's entire existence, and they killed him for it. So where does that leave room going forward for sitting down and talking? How can you sit down and talk with someone who feels like if you say the wrong thing, it's okay to kill you?
Well, Herbert Marcuse of the Frankfurt School, for those who don't know, is a group of Marxists. They're in Germany. Some of them were of Jewish descent. They got a little nervous when Hitler came to power, rightfully so, and they said, we're out of here. And they came to America at the invitation of John Dewey, a progressive Marxist himself, the father of modern education, progressive education, John Dewey, who, by the way, went to the Soviet Union in the late 20s, early 30s to study the Karl Marx way of education, then came back and taught it at Columbia. But Herbert Marcuse, these guys all get brought over here by at least some of the early faculty of the Frankfurt School get brought over here in about 1933. Well, one of the leaders was Herbert Marcuse, who coined the phrase "make love, not war." But he actually wrote a paper in 1965 called Repressive Tolerance. And I've quoted him in so many of my books for so many years. And I want to just read the quote to you so people realize I'm not making it up. Here's what he wrote in his 1965 paper. This is from my book, Marxianity, which, you don't have to buy. You can get it as an ebook for free if you're a Vault member at worldyoutube.com/vault. It's my 2018 book, Marxianity. But Herbert Marcuse, who coined that phrase, make love, not war, greatly influenced talk about Charlie Kirk influencing college students in 2020, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. Herbert Marcuse was influencing college students in the 60s. And think about people like Hillary Clinton. Okay? It's kind of interesting. You think about Herbert Marcuse influencing college kids in the 60s, and you think about Charlie Kirk influencing kids. Two diametrically opposed worldviews here. But Herbert Marcuse wrote in 1965 his paper, Repressive Tolerance, quote, liberating tolerance then would mean intolerance against movements from the right and toleration of movements from the left. As to the scope of this tolerance and intolerance, it would extend to the stages of action as well as discussion and propaganda of deed as well as word, end quote. He went on to say that if you were for armament, you should be stripped of your freedom of speech. If you were not for welfare payments and the welfare state, you should be stripped of your free speech. So this idea of depriving conservatives of their free speech is not new, of course, in America. But now they've gone so far as to try to criminalize it, not just say you're intolerant, but to now say we're going to criminalize you. Like in Great Britain, we just saw a guy arrested for calling a cop a Muppet. I know you saw that, right? He calls a cop a Muppet, a puppet.
Big Bird or Ernie or...
Exactly. And that's considered offensive and worthy of being arrested. But they've been at this a long time, decades, to make it where our speech is illegal, not accepted, to now where our speech is criminal. Right?
Well, right. That's where it's been headed for a long time. This hasn't been, a few years in the making.
Right.
It's been decades in the making. And I don't know. It's hard to pin it down, but it feels like there's been an acceleration since the pandemic started, almost like they realize that world politics are, shifting back, and they have a one last shot at getting this done. It feels that way. I don't know if I could prove it in court.
Okay, so where do you think this is going as far as before the assassination of Charlie Kirk, you were writing about this. Now you're writing more and you see the reaction. Can our country stay together? I mean, I don't know how we can. I really don't. I mean, if we can't agree that, hey, it's okay to pray on the floor of the house for a man's family who has just been assassinated in 4K, and we have people celebrating it, what common values do we have, Jeff, that hold the republic together? We are independent sovereign states. I don't have to tell you that. But for the viewers, we're independent sovereign states. And we entered into an agreement. We created the federal government. And we had a contract, and it's been changed and flipped with verbal gymnastics and applying, moral relativism to the law, situational ethics, legal positivism, Christopher Columbus laying down his, idea of the ever-changing and evolving law. And many states, I think, are increasingly come to the point of realizing there is nothing to hold us together in this union through the federal government when we're talking Tennessee versus California, Tennessee versus Oregon, Mississippi versus Washington State. Why are we even a union anymore? They hate us. They want to criminalize us. They rejoice when our friends, our relatives, or people we admire are murdered. Why are we staying in this union anymore? We don't even agree to the rule of law and the laws of nature, nature's God anymore. How do we stay together, Jeff?
So you're hinting at a Civil War type scenario,
or a voluntary separation where we just say, look, we don't want a war. We're going our own way.
And I think it's really instructive if you look back at the last great crisis in this country, during the real Civil War. And there was a polarizing issue. And I know there's a lot of debate about this, but I think let's just go with the mainstream history. And that is that the nation was divided over the issue of slavery. And the question was, can a person be property? Or is there something inherently, intrinsically valuable about people that they can never be property? And those were two different worldviews. And those worldviews had nothing in common. There's no middle ground. And the mistake that the country made for years was to try to compromise. So you had the Missouri Compromise and the Mason-Dixon line and all of these unstable, tenuous efforts to try to keep the peace. And eventually it just broke apart like a spring that was coiled, too tightly. It just shattered. And so the question is that where we are in this country? Are we now facing issues where the worldviews are so different and distinct that there is no common ground between them? So, for example, vaccines. Is a vaccine something that it's okay to force someone to take for the good of the community, even if they have to encounter the risk of injury or even death? Or is somebody's body inviolate and you cannot coerce someone ethically to take an injection that they don't want? Is there middle ground between those two positions? Or is speech violence, or is speech a fundamental right? Where's the negotiation between those two? Like, will we concede that sometimes speech can be violence if it really hurts your feelings, and they'll concede that sometimes it's okay to hurt my feelings because it's your right? I mean, it sounds even ludicrous to talk about it. And so the question is, have we reached another point like we were in the 1860s, where we've got these entrenched worldviews that are just incompatible? And I'll leave you to answer that.
Yeah, well, I think we have. And of course, I come from the position that the states wanted the right to leave the Union. Now, whether it was over slavery or whatever else, they wanted the right to leave. And when they when the troops went across Virginia, headed to, what was it, North Carolina, that was a breaking point for Lee. He said, wait a minute, you're sending federal troops across my Virginia to them, and they want to leave? And yet we know Lee was very greatly convicted about the whole issue of slavery, as were many of these people. And it was an institution, I think, going out. But there's been this question for a while. Can states withdraw? We don't want to be a part of this union anymore. And I think they're making the answer for us. And I think they're doing it deliberately. I think this is all designed. I know that people like Trevor Loudon, who I had on last night, and I'm not advocating for a civil war. I would rather see just an agreement that a collection of states will leave the union and we're not going to be under this system anymore, which isn't working anymore. But Trevor Loudon's saying, the CCP and China, that's what they want. Well, I get it. But regardless of what the CCP want, there's what needs to happen. You can't continue in this vein where it's a struggle for political power so that you can criminalize and throw your enemies in jail for simply exercising their parental authority, that they don't want to tell their little boy that they're a little girl. And if you don't go along with it, we're going to take your child and put them in a home where they're groomed and sexually molested, or we're going to imprison you, or you've got to take this death shot. I mean, I know the CCP and what they would like to see, but we have to put that aside and deal with that as it comes. That shouldn't be used as a boogeyman to make us say that we somehow have to sit here and continue to be abused by a federal system that wants to throw Christians and conservatives in prison. And it's a matter of who can get a hold of the power, and then whoever has control of the power can control the National Guard and can control the FBI, because that's what we're seeing. We're seeing under Obama and certainly under Biden what the FBI was weaponized. Now we see this push back toward the other direction to get it in the center. But if the Democrats take over, they're going to swish back to the other side. And all that then becomes is a fight for political power so we can use our power to say that gives us the right to now violate the civil liberties and God-given rights of another individual. At some point, you have to say, we're not playing your game anymore. We're not playing, can you rig the election, get power, and therefore you have the moral authority of might makes right. I don't see that ending. I only see this ending in two ways. Either we separate agreeingly certain states, or eventually they're going to rig the election, as they've done before, and we're going to be right back with Joe Biden type scenario, but even worse, and then you can kiss it goodbye, because they actually then have control of the military, the FBI, and a lot of forces. What are your thoughts?
So I think you're enunciating that tension, that that wound up spring. It's reached the point where you just, no matter how hard you tighten it, it's not going to get any tighter, and it's starting to crack because something has to give. The pendulum swinging back and forth, the swings are getting wider and wider, right? And nobody wants to be here for that next swing back. Today, I don't know if you saw it, but Dilbert cartoonist Scott Adams, he posted a pretty serious rant arguing that the Democrat Party needs to be dissolved, I guess is the good way to say it. And he said that, up until Charlie Kirk's assassination, he would have told you, as I would argue, that it's healthy for America to have two strong political parties competing with each other. But Scott said he feels like we're past that point now. And I think that he's sensing exactly what we've been talking about, that there's we've reached this breaking point and something has to give.
And that's interesting. I want to play a little bit of that, but that's interesting because yesterday I had on Trevor Loudon and a few others, and that we talked about the fact, I brought up the fact that under Senator Frank Church of Idaho, he pushed so that our FBI could not monitor, surveil the communists and the communist parties unless you knew they were doing something illegal. Well, how would you know them if you're not surveilling them? Well, we don't have to guess that the goal of the Communist Party is to overthrow the government, So they started to tie the hands of our federal government, central government, FBI, to monitor some of these groups. And they grew and they grew and grew. And now these groups are the Democrat Party. The very insurrectionists, the subversives, the folks that are the anarchists that are sowing the idea of overthrowing our government, they're now the judges. They're now, some of them were in our military. I think we had some of them that were generals. We've got them as elected officials. Now we have the Islamists. We know what they want. They want to overthrow our form of government. They want Sharia, Islamic law. So we've gotten to a point where we are now legalizing. It's always psychological projection. They accuse us of what it is they are. They're the domestic terrorists. In South Africa, we know for a fact that Nelson Mandela, a communist, was involved in terrorism. He supposedly confessed to Jesse Jackson that right before he was arrested, he was about to be involved in more terrorism involving children in a school. We know his wife, Winnie, used to put, we have the videos of it, tires doused in gasoline around people and light them on fire. And Ronald Reagan spoke about it in the East Room, called a necklace. They did this to white and black. Blacks that didn't want to go along with the communists, they would burn them alive. And now we have the communists who are the domestic terrorists, the Islamists who are the domestic terrorists. We let them come into power. We're letting them make the laws. We're letting them rewrite our laws at the local, state, and federal level. Now they're holding Sharia courts in certain states. Now they get the call to prayer 5 times a day in major cities. Now they're going around telling shops, you're on notice, no more tobacco, no more alcohol, no more gambling, no more pork. We used to have a day and time where these parties, these institutions or organizations or subversives, they would have never been allowed to organize to the point they actually become the dominant political party. Would you agree?
Yeah. So if you think back on your recent history, in the early 90s, the Soviet Union fell. And nobody argues that there wasn't a large group of communist subversives in this country at that time. That's what the whole Cold War was about. That's what, the FBI and many domestic agencies were working on for a long time. Where do you think all those communists went when the Soviet Union fell? Bookmark that thought. They didn't leave the country. Let's agree on that. They either went into the Democrat Party or the Republican Party. Now, put that on the back burner. What year would you say that this country really went off the rails when, things really started to go sideways? And before you answer, think about, I'm sure you've seen it, as have I, all the posts from Gen X people. I'm a Gen Xer, talking about how great we had it when we were kids and growing up in the 80s and how,
I'm 56. How old are you, Jeff?
58.
Okay, so you and I are the same age, basically.
Yeah, so you remember what it was like. Our parents didn't know where we were all day long. We had high school parties that were unsupervised. Everybody was fine. We went to concerts. We had real music and real bands. There was fashion. There was, artistic and cultural vibes that were unique to that decade. And then something happened in the 90s and especially in the aughts, and everything locked up. And, if you were to look at the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, and pictures of people from each of those decades, you would be able to pick which decade it was by how the people were dressed. But you can't do that for the last 30 years because everything's just stopped. Science has stopped up until the last 2 or 3 years when, it suddenly kicked into gear again with AI and self-driving cars and Elon's rockets. But before that, nothing happened for 30 years in science.
And if I were going to guess, I would say what has projected and propelled society, particularly in America, has been the growth of Christianity. Your broadcast networks, your evangelistic organizations, colleges. I mean, we know that some of our biggest Ivy League schools were started to be institutions to train Christian men, leaders, right? So I say the explosion of Christianity in America, and particularly as we began to print Bibles and evangelize the world and send out missionaries and create these institutions for that purpose. And there was a common culture, even if you didn't go to church, there was still a Christian ethos that you honor the flag, you respect the flag, you're patriotic, yes sir, no sir, you respect the parents. If a parent sees another child doing something, they wouldn't have stopped for a moment, they wouldn't have thought for a moment not to correct that child, say, don't do that, don't make me go tell your parents, don't do that. There was a morality, right? There was a morality even in the young people, right? That like when I was growing up, only the potheads smoked pot. Only the potheads smoked pot. And a bunch of my peers, they were not having sex. They weren't. They might have been going right up to the edge, but they were not having sex because they knew the consequences that had been grained into them. If you do that and you get a girl pregnant, you're going to ruin your life, destroy your reputation, that of the girl, that of your own family, and you'll be saddled with this before you get out of the gate. And then good luck explaining that to the gal you futurely want to marry, how you got this child. Oh, I got to tell you about my child. What? So there were ideas and consequences instilled, and people say, well, that's fear. Yeah, you know what? The studies show getting an STD and the fear of all that, it actually works with kids. It actually works. But there was basically a governor, like on an engine. There was a governor that was placed on the culture through a Christian ethos that we pretty much all agreed to. And you could even see some of it in the movies. Even in the movies that were made in the 60s and the 70s, there was still an ethos that was being put out in those movies. And I think if I had to guess when it all changed, it started changing when biblical Christianity or Christian values began to be eradicated from the center square. 62 prayer, 63 Bible reading, 1980 10 Commandments. Let's not teach them about God or moral law. You got, was it 1985 off the top of my head, 83, 85, somewhere there? We cannot teach creation versus evolution next to each other and let the kids decide. No, you got to teach them that they evolved from pond scum and life has no ultimate meaning. So my guess would be when you neuter the culture from a Christian influence, you are now extinguishing the power of the nation for excellence and advancement. Because I know many of our greatest scientists and writers and authors and inventors were Christians. We don't rehearse this, but that's my thought.
Yeah. So I think what you just described is that the problem started during the Cold War when we were fighting the communists, right? That began the downward trajectory. And then I would argue that it got rocket fuel in the 90s and the aughts. And if you asked me to point to a single inflection point, I would point to the Patriot Act in 2001.
Now, why? Why? Now, just so I don't want the audience to think I say this all the time, but I do lately, but you don't know this. I was on the air with people after 9/11 talking about the Patriot Act and saying, I think it's dangerous. Wait till Hillary Clinton gets into power and uses it. And we were getting criticized. Well, you guys not a patriot? Are you pro-communist? Are you for the Islamists? Like, no, but I fear the government having too much power and intruding. And of course, we now know it. But how do you think the Patriot Act was that tipping point for such cultural transformation?
So I think by the time that the Patriot Act was passed, the leftover communists had been so deeply embedded in government that they had effective control. Call it the deep state or whatever you want to call it. And the Patriot Act invested the federal government with so much power that it could literally shut down entire areas of scientific research. And I say that, I'm not guessing. There was recently some discussion about this by the tech leaders who had met with Biden administration officials, and the national security officials that were meeting with them told them that if they didn't like the way AI was going, they were going to pull its plug and then described how they'd done it before in other areas of science. All the intelligence agencies, Brandon, set up offices in Hollywood. Why do they need offices in Hollywood? And the Defense Department, by the way. It was because they were reviewing the scripts and approving them. For what? For national security. So all of our media and entertainment, since the millennium has been filtered through government censors, and not censors for morality like we used to have, because, that's not tolerated. Marcuse's rule is, right, you can't tolerate the conservative ideals or values, only the liberal ones. So it's not ethical censorship. It's much more Orwellian than that. It's this national security censorship that we have. We need to have the right ideas so we don't vote for the wrong politicians, so that it won't disrupt the natural order and the unipolar world. So that's a whole nother rabbit hole to go down, but that would be my argument. My argument would be that the Patriot Act, and then you see how we get to Trump and they use the Patriot, the FISA court and the FISA surveillance and all that, to basically perform a coup in the U.S. government. I mean, they still argue about whether that's what the evidence shows, but I'm convinced.
Well, that's very interesting, Jeff, because if the CIA almost from its inception began to be taken over by communist influence, and to the point you end up with, I think, a CIA director who admitted he voted for a Communist Party USA candidate in the 70s and 80s, Gus Hall, John Brennan, who some say converted to Islam. And there's, a real syncretism there in the values of Marxism and the values of Islam. They have so much in common. If you have your intelligence agency like the CIA almost compromised from the beginning, then you can see that it's really not about securing the nation or protecting the nation. It is about hijacking the nation. And then making sure that only the people come to power they want, which is why I think they got rid of JFK, which is why I think you ended up with, I think they were not counting on Ronald Reagan winning. I think they underestimated him. I think they thought, he's kind of an actor, a B-level actor. I think they were shocked when Reagan won. I think they tried killing him, in my opinion. I won't get into all that, with this John Hinckley, which is a weird thing. And then, of course, that would have made the former CIA director, George H. Bush, president. I think they basically created Barack Hussein Obama. I think he's a creation of the CIA. And I've interviewed Judge Joe Brown extensively in the studio, because he lives right down the road, about that. I think that guy is a creation of the CIA.
You don't think it was his long experience in government and all of his, his positions?
No. And Judge Joe Brown says he's seen the pictures of a very young Barack Obama in a golf cart with a young George W. and then George H., the man, golfing with Barry Sorrento's father, Barack Hussein's father, who was a CIA guy. Judge Joe Brown's on my show talking about this extensively. I think Biden was handpicked. We know it was the Council for a Livable World, a communist front group that went to him, according to the research of many people like Trevor Loudon, through Arnold Hammer, and funded his campaign to run for U.S. Senate in the small state of Delaware when he was like 29 years old. The same thing with John Kerry. I think the CIA and a lot of these communist groups have been working together for the downfall of the country and the neutering of America and getting us into treaties that we agreed to with the Soviets, to not proliferate, not to test nuclear weapons, not to advance, while they're breaking them left and right, advancing onto fifth and sixth generation warfare. And so, yes, I think, I've never heard anyone say it till you, but I think you make an excellent point for why we see in the early 2000s this massive shift in the culture, the movies, and then there's just not the advancement, as you say, for almost 25 plus years.
Correct.
I don't know many people having this conversation. Do you?
Believe it or not, I didn't come up with that idea. I came across it. So there is a small sliver of folks who have noticed. And Brandon, it's so stark. I mean, you just take, your main, whatever your TV show representing each decade and put them side by side, and you see the hairstyles change, the dress changes, everything, right, boom, up until you get to the 90s. And then it just stops and becomes just bland, all the same. And you can't tell one generation from the next. So, and then you pick any other area, art, look at what's happened to art. They came up with modern art, right, in the late 80s and 90s, and this ugly, just weird spaghetti stuff. And that's all we have. And yet every decade before that, there was some new, artistic movement that transgressed the boundaries or reformed everything or took a different way of looking at it. And that just stopped. So pick any area that you want and you'll find the same thing. It just died.
I want to play before we wrap just a little bit. You teased it, a little bit of Scott Adams, September 11, 2025. I think he's terminal, by the way. Is he not?
That's what he says. He's got more time, but he's never said he's been cured.
So I think he is speaking out and realizes every day at every broadcast he needs to use it. And here he goes today.
So people say the line has been crossed and everything's different, and I don't know. But let me suggest a few things that might change. Number one, I saw Mike Cernovich helpfully point out that this would be a good time for congressional hearings now, he said in a post on X. He goes, every billionaire funding far left-wing extremism, Soros, Bill Gates, Reid Hoffman, massive RICO investigation now. Every dollar accounted for, every pass-through group's financial records public. What do you think of that? Now, you might say, well, why haven't they done that anyway? Why don't we know by now everything that's happening in these NGOs? We know a lot, and we know that they're corrupt money laundering organizations, but maybe even go bigger and just make all NGOs illegal, unless they've gone through some specific kind of vetting process. Just make them all illegal, not permanently. You say, all right, you could be illegal, you could be legal, but you're going to have to answer all these questions in writing, who's in charge and what'd you do and what'd you do with the money. You'd have to agree to be audited, stuff like that. So I'm 100% in favor of the government going way more aggressive on RICO investigations for this massive criminal enterprise called Democrats. Would it work? Well, remember, the Democrats have really good lawyers and lots of them. So probably it would just get all tied up in the courts for 100 years until Trump was out of office and it all went away. But it's one thing we could do. It's one thing we could do. And I'll tell you one thing that's changed is risk tolerance. When one of your own, and by the way, I take this very personally. I didn't know Charlie personally. My only fleeting connection was he once invited me on his podcast, and I thought I was going to be dead in a few weeks, so I didn't return his message. So I never talked to him. But it's still personal. This one's personal because I consider myself a brother in arms, meaning that we were in the same war, in the same platoon. I just didn't know him personally. So the fact that he got taken out, that's personal. That's personal. And so when that happens, my personal risk profile gets adjusted. When I say, you mean there's a chance I'll be shot? All right, then RICO every one of these motherfuckers to the ground. I wouldn't have wanted to, destroy the country by going after the billionaires and really making it that overtly political. And it would be massive destruction. Now I'm all in. I'm all in for the massive destruction.
Wow. And there's more to that. That's just 3 minutes and 12 seconds of what is 6 minutes and 13 seconds. That's about half. I want to hear the rest later. But I think we're heading towards something. I think people are realizing, as you said, we're at a tipping point. the spring is wound too tight. It can't be tightened anymore without there being massive destruction to our very existence. So if there's going to be destruction, well, then bring it, because it seems like there's going to be destruction one way or the other. Either there's going to be massive destruction of the tyranny that they're erecting or massive destruction of us. It's kind of like Winston Churchill said, it is better to die than to live as slaves. Right?
Yeah, I'm really glad that you played that clip for the viewers, because even though we sort of described it before, you need to hear Scott and his tone of voice and sort of the power and the force of what he was saying, because I don't know if you picked up on it the same way that I did, but what I sense when I hear Scott talking is I hear a man who's repressing some, incredible strong emotions. And he's controlling them, but he lets it out. Like when he says, well, I say, well, burn these blankety blanks to the ground, then it just kind of edges out for that second. And you see that dangerous level of just powerful, overwhelming emotion behind it. And I think that's how a lot of us are feeling right now.
Mm-hmm. And you just wait until they hyperinflate away the dollar and flip us to a new system. That I think they're going to be able to somehow do this and keep things under control. But if they drive this system of ours in the reset, where it becomes massively inflationary, and people own nothing, and he thinks they're going to be happy, Klaus Schwab, by 2030 you'll own nothing and be happy. I don't think so. I think there's a percentage of the country that's never worked, that's never earned anything, that's never saved, that's never taken risk. But to those of us who are my age, maybe a little younger and older, who have worked like dogs, never belonged to a golf club, drove used cars for years, worked like a dog for the first 5 years of my marriage to be able to get the down payment to buy a house, and then worked my tail off to pay it off in 3 years. First townhome, $120,000. My wife and I work like dogs. We'd never have been on a cruise, never traveled overseas, all the things we chose not to do. Does it make us better than somebody else? Does it make us more virtuous than somebody else? Does it make us more spiritual than somebody else? There are just things we chose not to do. Others may, but we will not, because we have certain goals. We want to be debt-free. We have built a home and a life and an organization, and we are debt-free. And by golly, if you think I'm going to sit here and let them destroy it and steal it, and I'm not going to take up a position with my brothers of the property owners, the bourgeoisie, or whatever they want to call us, against the proletariat or the globalists, bring it. Because I would rather die than live as a slave. Because it's wrong. It's wrong. And I got the Bible on my side, and I got the Constitution on my side. But if they think that they're going to reset this thing, take what everyone has worked for their whole life and trying to leave something for their children and grandchildren to make the burden a little bit easier on them, which I know that's, for a lot of men, that's in their bones. Maybe it's not because we have a bunch of feminized men today, but I know it's in my father and father-in-law's generation. I know it's in my blood to try to leave something to my children and my grandchildren, not because I want to spoil them, but because I want to try to help them get off to a good start with their families and marriage, take a little strain off of them just to get them going. And you're telling me we're going to take people who have worked their whole life, been responsible, chosen not to do things in order to pay their taxes and try to get ahead and be debt-free, and we're going to come in and destroy it all? Then I'm sorry, we're ready to go. Let's go. I'm with him. And I'll tell you, a man that has nothing left to lose has nothing left to lose. So if they think they can steal away what people have worked for and they won't respond, well, I don't think they know the average John Wayne American that's still around. And there may not be many of us, but there's enough to make them have a very bad day, in my opinion.
Well, brother, you and I are in the same platoon. And I'll always have your back. And I'm up for whatever's coming. But I don't think we're necessarily fighting this alone. And my thing is to be optimistic anyway. That's what people like about my blog. How great is it that somebody took out Klaus Schwab with his own Me Too problem? Right? So there's forces working in this world that we don't know about that are the forces, the white hats, if you want to call it that.
Mm-hmm.
So, we're not on our own, but we are definitely approaching in this country, some kind of zenith, some tipping point, some turning point, if you will, where something has to give.
You know what I was shocked to find out? 38% of Americans own their home free and clear. Are you shocked by that number? 38% of Americans. I asked Grok. I'll do it again real quick just to prove it to you.
Yeah, that's a lot higher than I would have guessed if you had asked me to guess.
How many Americans own their home outright? It was like 83 million households. 38% of America, 30% of households own their home, and ended up being like 83 million Americans.
I'll count that as good news.
Well, I thought that was amazing news, because when people have skin in the game, then they will stand up, right? And I don't know about you, but in America, okay, it's 34.8 million Americans own their home outright, 34.1 million. And the figure represents about 39.8% of all U.S. homeowners.
Wow.
Roughly 25.5% of total U.S. household. Now, I don't know about you, but where I live here in the Mid-South, property and property values and property rights are a big thing, even with old school, not the new Democrats, but old school Democrats. I think that's, again, something that could bridge Republicans and Democrats, bring Americans together, is privacy and private property. Privacy and private property. I mean, I've said we need a new party called the Private Property Party, because I think there are a lot of Democrats, a lot of independents, a lot of libertarians, a lot of apolitical people that say, let Washington and these guys do whatever they want to do, but you better not mess with my property, right? You better not mess with my house that I've worked my whole life for. At least I have somewhere to live. I paid it off because I at least want to know that. So I think the fact you got 39.8% of U.S. homeowners, or roughly 25.5% of total households, owning their own property is a good sign. Closing comment?
I don't know if you saw it, but my terrific Governor Ron DeSantis, has made it a main plank of his new agenda to abolish property taxes for primary homestead.
Great idea. Great idea. And that's that private property party I'm talking about. The private property party. I mean, we got to find a few things, a few major things that we can agree on as Americans and coalesce around that, right? I think private property, parental authority, freedom of religion, freedom of speech, I think those are things we can all agree on. A lot of us. Where we may not agree on other things, we can certainly agree on those. Well, folks, you should visit his website, coffeeandcovid.com, coffeeandcovid.com. Jeff, you're a great guest. I want to get you back on again more regularly. I love these conversations. These are not rehearsed. We're just talking, and the audience just gets to listen in. Great conversation. Thank you, Jeff.
I enjoyed it very much. Thanks, Brandon.
Jeff Childers checking in, coffeeandcovid.com. I also think our personalities balance each other. I'm a little, he's real laid back. That my wife and I are that same way. That makes a nice kind of balancing off. But I like his calm personality. Allows me to be revved up. That's a good conversation we had. We'll post it online. You guys should share it everywhere. All right? We'll be right back after this break.
True beauty isn't applied. It's nourished from within. Bella Grace Elixir, a luxurious, scientifically crafted blend designed to restore radiance, vitality, and strength at a cellular level. At the heart of Bella Grace Elixir lies cat's claw, a powerful herb from the Amazon known for its ability to control inflammation and protect collagen. With Verisaw collagen peptides, it goes beyond the surface. stimulating your body's natural collagen production to reduce fine lines, improve skin elasticity, and promote real, visible change. Bella Grace Elixir doesn't stop at collagen. It includes astaxanthin, one of nature's most powerful antioxidants. 6,000 times stronger than vitamin C, astaxanthin protects your skin from harmful UV rays and environmental stress, while locking in hydration and promoting a radiant, youthful glow. Experience the power of nature with Bella Grace Elixir at melissahousebg.com. Discover the science behind Bella Grace Elixir at melissahousebg.com. Read powerful testimonials from doctors and real customers who've experienced life-changing results, and explore other wellness products from Bella Grace. Bella Grace Elixir is more than just a product. It's a solution. Visit melissahousebg.com today.